at, but I've got other, now below that site, my back is curved, and I've got another thing in my lower back, so I've got I have to be very careful with my back. Best thing I do is, as long as I keep going to the gym and working, staying mobile, I'm good. If I go several weeks without doing that, my back starts hurting.
That helps keeping
Yep. Keep working it. And I've been a chiropractor patient for years.
Yeah.
And they've really helped me. But yeah, crooked preacher. Do you have time to hook the chairs together tonight? I mean, sometime.
I can do it before Sunday.
All right, we're on, we're on. Good evening. Welcome. Enjoying this heat wave we're having? Signs of warmer weather coming, right? Let's hope it continues. You know, it's going to get cold again, but next year, probably. But glad you're here. We're in Acts chapter 19, hopefully finishing up Acts chapter 19 tonight. We're going to start off by looking at a few slides here in a minute, but no extra handouts or anything tonight. We'll be just reading through the text, the second half of chapter 19. So let's pray and then we'll get started. Our loving God, we bow before you. We are thankful for your daily goodness to us, your blessing and care, your patience with us as we struggle. We thank you for your grace and your mercy, and we want to share that with others as you give us opportunity. Just thank you for this time where we can be encouraged by one another and built up by your word, and pray we'll be faithful with that. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we're going to get on an airplane and fly to Ephesus tonight. It's sort of a cool airplane because it's also a time travel. I'm saving you, what, $3,000 or $4,000, right? By taking you to Ephesus by picture tonight. But Paul is in Ephesus here in chapter 19, and several of the pictures I'll show you are things directly referred to in the text here. And I'm hoping we can see these okay. I know because the screen's so far away, this doesn't always show up great for all of us. But this first slide is a diagram of Paul's third missionary journey again. And so if you remember, he started and he came through the places he had been on the first journey, Galatia, and then he traveled to Ephesus. That's where we find him in Acts chapter 19. And he stays there a long time, 3.5 years or so. And then we'll notice in what we read tonight, he says he wanted to pass through Macedonia and Achaia on his way back to Jerusalem. So he's going to do that, but maybe not in the exact order he had planned on. But right now he's in Ephesus, the city that's the great city of Asia, Asia Minor. And we'll see how that works out, at least the second part of it. The greatest structure in ancient Ephesus was the temple of Diana or Artemis, which I'll show you what remains of it here in a minute, but this is sort of an artist's reconstruction. If you've ever seen the Parthenon, a picture of the Parthenon in Athens, a similar kind of columned building, except this one in Ephesus was 4 times as big as the Parthenon. So it was gigantic, and it was the center of life in Ephesus. And especially at this time in the first century, they didn't have a lot of other industry or things like that they made their money with. they hosted this temple, and that was the big thing for them. So it wasn't just a place of worship. These great temples were also places you put your money. So they served as like banks, loan centers, and so it was very important. So when the people that are devoted to Artemis feel threatened by the gospel, we start to see why this riot happens in Ephesus here in chapter 19. But this was one of what they call the 7 wonders of the ancient world. 7 great buildings of the ancient world, the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. This is what's left of it. If you go today, there's one column standing in a field in Ephesus, and you notice it's sort of got little cracks all down through it. So whenever you see that, that means it's been stacked back together. And most of the places you visit ruins in the Bible lands, a lot of times you'll see this. There'll be columns, but they've been put back together because this is a land of a lot of earthquakes and, of course, through the centuries, wars and so forth. And there's nothing really left of this temple of Artemis, but they did stack one column for us so we get an idea. These columns were about 60 feet high, by the way, marble columns. It was an amazing structure, apparently. And here is a picture of Artemis, the goddess that they worshipped. This is a little figurine, marble figurine, probably about that big or so, and they found many, many of these through the years, archaeologists have. And if you could see it up close, she's just covered with stuff. A lot of people think these are breasts. Covered with she's a fertility goddess. There are other scholars that say no, that's not what they are. They're some kind of fruit or something, but it's something to depict fertility. And there's little animals all over her, lions and all kinds of things. Everything meant to depict, this is the person you go to if you want your crops to do well, if you want to have babies, if you know, anything that might be considered fertility. That's what she was. And so there was a great statue of her in the middle of this temple that the head of it almost came up above the columns itself. Of course, that's long gone. But they have found a lot of these little figurines like this that apparently you could buy one and take to your home or that kind of thing to show you were devoted to this goddess. There's another picture of her in one of these figures. We're going to see a reference to these things in Acts 19 tonight. But again, you see she's sort of covered with plants and animals and all kinds of stuff. Then we're going to see a reference to the theater in Ephesus. Ephesus had 2 theaters, a small one and a gigantic one, which we think was the largest theater in the world at the time. It could seat 25,000 people. And this is, the theater is pretty well preserved. You can see it sort of built into the hillside there. But there are a lot of these in the Bible lands. Did you guys visit like Caesarea Theater? That's an amazing one in Israel. Did you test the acoustics? Where a person standing down on the stage way down there could whisper and you could hear him in the top row, right? So they knew how to work with acoustics, so they didn't need one of these, amazingly. But anyway, it's the same kind of place but bigger. And we're going to see how a lot of people get together in this place here in the book of Acts. There's another picture of it. I know it's dark. There's one a little bit clearer. You can see the stage area and how steep it was in order to get 25,000 people in there. And that's another picture of it. It's amazing that much of it is left after over 2,000 years, right? and I always throw this picture in when I show pictures of Ephesus because you know what this is? What do we call them in West Virginia? Outhouses. But these were really outhouses because they were out in the middle of where everybody was. So this is public bathrooms in Ephesus. No privacy. No, this is all open. It was like along the big street, and there'd be these places, and you could go sit down and take care of things. Yes. And they actually, they would have like a trough here with running water that you could use. But there's another one a little bit, you get an idea. But no, it wasn't like, didn't have the roof, didn't have little dividers, you know. I don't know if it was handicap accessible, anything like that. But public bathrooms. Got to keep in mind that in that world, like they did not, if you ever saw Greek art, Greek or Roman art, it's all naked, right? So they're not concerned about things like that. You go to the gymnasium, gymnasium means naked. So you go to exercise, like Planet Fitness or whatever your gym is, you didn't go clothed, you understand? And they had public baths, and so public restrooms. But I always like to show that. I'll leave that picture up there for us as we read here in chapter 19. So we're going to begin about verse 21. Uh-huh. I did see something about that a lot of the stuff that was part of that original temple was used in other places like a mosque. And yeah. And that reminded me of another part of this. We'll see that one of the things they're upset about is people aren't buying the silver statues of Artemis anymore that made people money. And people wonder, why haven't we found any of those silver statues of Artemis? We found marble ones, like I showed you pictures of. But if you found something made of silver or gold, what would happen to it? I mean, what would happen to it today? You would take it, burn it down, melt it down, and probably get money for it. So there's none of the silver ones left, apparently. But some of the other materials like terracotta and marble and so forth. But yes, they reused a lot of it. That's why not much is left. Not only the earthquakes, but just people stealing stuff. Okay. Chapter 19, verse 21. Now after these events, Paul resolved in the Spirit to pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem, saying, after I've been there, I must also see Rome. So again, we showed on the map how his plan was to travel through Greece. Again, this is Missionary Journey 3. He's already been there and established those churches. Remember the names of some of the churches up in the northern part of Greece? What were some of those cities that he visited in Macedonia and that there are churches? Thessalonica, Philippi, Berea, okay, some of the places that we've already read the stories about. So he's going to go back and visit these. And then down in the south, in Achaia, of course, you have Athens, Corinth, those important cities. Paul not only went to new places and planted churches where the gospel had not been preached, but he also went back to places and reconnected with the churches that he had taught and tried to strengthen them and help them. Sometimes he went back to ground that had already been plowed and seeded with the gospel to encourage them. Of course, he wrote letters to them and so forth. So he's wanting to go back And there's one place here he mentions that he wants to go, but he hasn't been yet. Where is that? You see, I must see Rome, right? And if you go read the book of Romans all the way through, you'll see he still hasn't been there when he writes them. He's never got to go. He's always wanted to go. He hasn't got to go. We'll see he ends up in Rome at the end of Acts here. But he wanted to go to Rome. Makes sense. He went to places like Ephesus and Rome where if he could plant the church strongly there, then it could radiate out into the surrounding places. That was sort of his strategy. Go to a place like Ephesus, and that's why we end up with churches in Colossae and Philadelphia and Laodicea, because they came from that initial hub that he went to. So he wants to do that with Rome. He's not going to get to Rome the way he wants to get to Rome, though, which we'll see as we get toward the end of the book here. So, verse 22, and having sent into Macedonia 2 of his helpers, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a while. So he sends some of his co-workers along ahead. He stays in Ephesus, right? And that's why we get this story here at the end of chapter 19 of what happens while he's still there. He's already been there for a few years, teaching. Remember, he rented a public hall, Hall of Tyrannus, and was teaching daily there after he got sort of booted out of the synagogue. So Luke goes on, he says, about that time there arose no little disturbance concerning the way. Again, what is the way? Yeah, it's one of the ways that the church is referred to, the early Christians, the way. So no little disturbance concerning the way, for a man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Artemis, brought no little business to the craftsmen. So this fellow Demetrius is the one that's going to sort of instigate this riot that takes place in the following verses. And notice what he makes: silver shrines of Artemis. A lot of people assume that it's sort of statues like we had a picture of here, except silver. But the word is actually, when it says silver shrines, that word shrine there is the word for temple in other places in the New Testament. It's the word for the place where the deity is worshipped. So, and I meant to bring this in here with me tonight, but imagine a little silver replica of the great temple that we had a picture of there. That kind of thing that you might buy almost as a that's the word I was looking for. A souvenir that a tourist would buy. And you can still do that today. Molly bought me one of the Parthenon. I've got it back there. I meant to bring that in tonight and say, here, this is the kind of thing that this is probably referring to, but in silver, and a picture of the Temple of Artemis. Apparently those were big sellers, at least at one point, and that's the cause of the problem here. He gathered together these people who made these things with the workmen in similar trades and said, men, you know that from this business we have our wealth. Now, this is the second time in Acts, at least the second time, where the people are upset with the preaching of the gospel because it's costing them money. Do you remember another case of that in... What's that? Yeah, what was going on there that somebody was upset? They cast out the demon and they lost their source of money, those who were controlling that girl. So now, in a bigger sense here in Ephesus, it's not like, well, Paul's stealing our church members, our temple attenders. This guy's upset, and he seems to have a lot of influence because he's losing money. As we said, the economy is centered around this temple in Ephesus. So he gets these guys together. You know that from this business we have our wealth, and you see and hear that not only in Ephesus but in almost all of Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away a great many people, saying that the gods made with hands are not gods. Well, look how influential the gospel is in this city, because you've got the silversmiths saying, not the Christians, but the silversmiths saying, not just here in Ephesus, but everywhere around in Asia, people are stopping, are no longer buying our temple trinkets, that kind of thing. That's pretty great influence, isn't it, that Paul and his team is having. And they quote the kind of stuff he's saying. Gods made with hands are not gods. That's exactly what Paul said. He goes on, he says in verse 27, there is danger not only that this trade of ours may come into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis may be counted as nothing, and that she may even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom all Asia and the world worship. So it was a source of pride for people in Ephesus that they had this temple. They were like the keeper of the Artemis temple. All right? So it's generating money. It's like, oh, you're from Ephesus. That's where the Artemis temple is. You're the temple keeper of Artemis. Like we would say, oh, you're from Lancaster. Wasn't that Civil War general from there? Where I grew up in Canton, oh, Hall of Fame, Football Hall of Fame, that kind of thing. Well, they were the Artemis temple place. And all the world, he says, is devoted to her, and we may lose it. She may be deposed. Okay, so going on, when they heard this, they were enraged and were crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So you see what he's doing here. He's instigating. So the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater. All right, this place. They rushed into the great theater, and they brought someone with them. Who was it that got dragged into the theater? A couple of Paul's co-workers, Gaius and Aristarchus. They're mentioned other places in the New Testament, but apparently they knew that they were associated with this guy who's preaching against idolatry. They drag them in. You imagine what they think they're going to do with them. These were Macedonians, it says, who were Paul's companions in travel. But when Paul wished to go in among the crowd, the disciples would not let him. That's an interesting situation, isn't it? It's like Paul wants to go. He's obviously not afraid, or his fear doesn't paralyze him, but he wants to go, and he's prevented from going by who? Who stops him? Disciples, Christians. They've got a church in Ephesus, right? You've got a lot of disciples, and they won't let him go. Paul thinks he ought to go. They're not going to let him. It's interesting that he's allowed to make that decision. He's not prevented. Sometimes the Spirit will stop Paul, right? So don't go this place. But apparently not here. It's the disciples that prevent it against Paul's better judgment. And verse 31, even some of the Asiarchs, and those are sort of like government officials of the area. They sort of traveled around from city to city, and there'd definitely be some of these in Ephesus. But they're government people. Some of them who were friends of his. Friends of whose? Paul. Paul has friends in government? Apparently. Maybe they're even brothers. A lot of people think these are some of the disciples. You know, he's baptized some of the... This would not be the first or the last time that we know he's baptizing people in government. When he's a prisoner in Rome, he says there's a lot of people in the Praetorian Guard. That's the secret service of the Roman emperor. A lot of people in the Praetorian Guard who are believers. So Paul is like really good at this. And the Lord's really working through him. I mean, he's good at it. But the Asiarchs, who were friends of his, sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theater. Obviously, they think it's not going to turn out well. You're probably going to die there. Now, some of them cried out one thing and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them did not know why they had come together. So we don't know how many are in the theater. You can get up to 25,000. We imagine thousands of people have come in the theater as a result of this riot. And as is often the case in such things, a bunch of them don't even know why they're there. That's still true today with these kinds of things. Right? When we see something like this happen, yeah, there are some that instigate it and maybe are leaders, but there's people involved in these mass protests and riots. They're just sort of having a good time. They don't know why they're there. And a lot of people here apparently don't. But they're willing to go along with the crowd, and if people say, there's Paul, let's tear him apart, I'm sure they'd participate. This kind of mentality, which is found in the ancient world, is found in the modern world. Verse 33, some of the crowd prompted Alexander, whom the Jews had put forward. So now we have a representative of the Jewish population in Ephesus, sort of put forward before the crowd, and he's going to try and speak. Now, why do you think, and we're sort of surmising here or reading between the lines, but why do you think a Jewish leader might stand up before this crowd and speak? What do you think? This isn't one of the Christians, apparently, but we know they didn't, right? They had kicked him out. But what would they have in common with Paul? He's Jewish. What do they believe in common? One God. So the Jews would agree that this idolatry is not good. So at least they'd have that much. Not that they were Paul's supporters, but they had that in common. They were also against all these gods. And we don't know exactly what he was going to say. He doesn't get to say it, but maybe he's going to say, we're not with this guy. We kicked him out. But he doesn't get to say that. Go.
Paul was also a Roman citizen. Even in the crowd, he was still a Roman citizen. He wanted some justification. If the Jews came out and said he's a heretic, that might be justification, but there still was more justification.
Yeah, Luke doesn't explain it all to us. It's just sort of fascinating the way it develops here. But as I said, he doesn't get to say anything. Stands up, motions with his hand, wanted to make a defense to the crowd. Defense of what? We don't know exactly, but probably, we're not with this guy, but y'all should get rid of these idols, that kind of thing. But when they recognized that he was a Jew, For about 2 hours, they all cried out with one voice, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." So you got this huge crowd in the theater shouting this phrase for 2 hours, and he doesn't get to speak. Why do you think realizing that the guy standing up saying, "Listen to me," was a Jew would make them do this? Why would they not want him to speak? They want to hear what he has to say? What was the riot about? The rally was about money and, our temple, and it's being threatened. So you don't want somebody that believes in one God, this atheist who only believes in one God, which is how they referred to Jews and Christians. Which is sort of an amazing thing, isn't it? But when there's thousands of gods and you only believe in one, you can see why they called him an atheist. They didn't believe in any of their gods. Right. That's right. Yeah, and so 2 hours. That seems amazing, but I guess they didn't have Netflix or anything to watch. But the way it's sort of calmed down is in the next paragraph here. When the town clerk came along, he quieted the crowd. Again, another official, sort of like a mayor, apparently, this person. He said, "Men of Ephesus, who is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple keeper of the great Artemis and of the sacred stone that fell from the sky?" What's that all about? Again, we're not 100% sure, but there was these legends that, and modern people like us think that a meteor struck the earth somewhere close by, and when they picked up the remainder, it sort of looked like one of those statues, and that became their goddess. The great stone that fell from the sky. We know that there were several religions in this part of the world that traced their origin back to a stone falling out of the sky. So maybe that's what's going on here. It's something like that, at least. And she's associated with that. So, superstition, that kind of thing. But he's trying to calm them down. Says, yeah, we all know Artemis is great, and we have this great temple, and so forth. Seeing then that these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rash. For you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemers of our goddess. So who's he defending here? This mayor is defending the disciples, the Gaius and Aristarchus, right? They're not against religion, and they're not blaspheming Artemis. So he's defending them. And he goes on, he says, if therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen with him have a complaint against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For we really are in danger of being charged with rioting today. The penalty against rioting in the Roman Empire is death. Romans wanted to maintain order in the cities that they had conquered. That's the main thing. Remember when all the stuff is going on with Jesus around the trial of Jesus, and what's Pilate's concern and the Jewish authorities that Romans are going to sweep in because we're out of control here. We're not having order. Oh, no doubt. Yeah. Yeah, if you're one of those people that you don't even know why you're there, and the mayor stands up and says, remember the soldiers? We're in danger of being charged with rioting.
Roman government set the base for most of our systems today, with the courts and the Senate and things like that. That they set a model for that. Anything good came from Rome. But like you said, they were all about order, and they didn't let them.
Right? If they,
I can't remember what the riot was. There was some big uprising or something before Christ. The year before that, I can't remember what it was, but they gone in and swept through and shut everything down and
crucified a bunch of people.
pressed everybody's mind like they're not going to do that again. Said that the Romans didn't put up with it. And especially if you're going to do something for Roman citizens, which Paul was, and people don't know who he was.
If you create mayhem in one of their cities, they are going to bring mayhem against you. Right? They're going to come and quell the riot and kill a bunch of people. Or no freedom of speech. No. That was a novel concept that arose later. So we're really in danger of being charged with rioting today, since there is no cause that we can give to justify this commotion. And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. So this guy really does a good job of calming things down and shutting this thing down. But, it's interesting. I think Paul reflects back on this later when he writes, if you go over to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, 2 Corinthians 1, I cannot read my writing. Verse 8, I believe. So this is, sometime later after this event in Acts 19, and Paul's writing to Corinth, and he says, "We don't want you to be unaware, brothers, of the affliction we experienced in Asia." So he's writing to the Corinthians, but he's talking about his time in Ephesus. "For we were utterly burdened beyond our strength, that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death, but that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead." We thought we were dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope. So maybe this event that he's reflecting back on. There's other places where he talks about he fought with deadly beasts at Ephesus. And there's some debate about whether he's talking about literally like in the Colosseum, kind of where they had to fight lions, or was he talking about really bad people? And that may have been another event altogether than this one that we're reading about tonight. And then there's another time he says that Aquila and Priscilla stuck their necks out for me and rescued me, which may have been this or another similar kind of event. So there's a lot of these kind of things going on. Not all of them are recorded for us. I saw a hand, somebody, Steve.
1 Corinthians 15:32 is where he says, "If I fought wild beasts in Ephesus for merely human reasons."
Yeah.
I always assumed he meant about this riot, that he was equating them with wild beasts.
Yeah.
Men that were shouting for 2 hours straight about learning to feed the gods.
It could be. It could be. There's an argument that this event that Luke records is before that, because that's 1 Corinthians. Remember, he writes 1 Corinthians from Ephesus. So some people think, well, this event happens before, his reference there. But I mean, it was some awful event, whatever it was, and we know that he was persecuted many times in situations like this, left for dead, beaten, whipped, imprisoned many times. Okay. Other comments or questions?
I think it's probably a good
don't envy you.
everybody's just out of control. I mean, it's just chaos. And, it was a high stake, right up there, very far couches. And we were there with my folks, we were throwing bottles, rocks, and bricks, and, get 300 a head. Like, just let us loose. Just said, take it, get under control. Yes, sir, then we just, everybody got out there right here, and just swept the streets. And, I mean, that's probably what they were afraid of happen.
Yeah.
But you can only allow it to happen.
Yeah. So he escapes this particular danger thanks to the brethren who prevent him from going in, and these public officials as well.
I think maybe it was one of the officials that, I mean, it's an assumption, but that maybe it warned him, someone that was connected, maybe like, well, I gotta get this under control before they're all, harmed, or killed, or stoned, or whatever. I mean, it's just.
Well, it definitely is, because it says there in verse 31 that these friends sent to him and were urging him not to venture into the theater.
Right.
So they're messaging him and telling him, no, don't go.
The one that's been part of that group.
Oh, I see. It may have been. Yeah, the town clerk. So it's interesting that Luke includes this story here at the end of the Ephesus, because you go to chapter 20, verse 1, and Paul's taken off into Greece then, going down the rest of that missionary journey and heading back to Jerusalem after that. He's going to have a interaction at the end of chapter 20 with the elders from Ephesus. So not only is there a church there, but they have elders. So he's going to speak to the Ephesian elders before he gets on the boat for Jerusalem at the end of chapter 20. So that's interesting that they, within a handful of years, they have elders established in the church in this place. And these guys couldn't have been Christians longer than 4 or 5 years. Couldn't have been, just on the timeline. So really maturing these Christians quickly, and they've got leadership in the churches. It's sad to think, that there are churches, that have been in existence for decades, in our day and age, don't have biblical elders. And yet, in a situation like this, here you have them. That's really what God wants. Okay. Thank you for being a part of class. Have a good rest of the week. We'll be in chapter 20 next week, Lord willing.